As in the case of men's haircuts, beards also have their own, in every sense, thick history that has passed through the ages. Wars, music, and the life of certain eras have played a major role in their formation. To date, the types of beards can no longer be counted. Every year, masters come up with completely new forms and develop old ones. We want to look into history and tell you about the 4 forms that started the beard culture, about their phenomenon and their long journey from the military to subculturists, as well as the impact of male vegetation on society as a whole. Espagnole, goatee. The history of the Espagnole dates back to the cultures of ancient Rome and ancient Greece. In those years, this form was identified with the god Pan, or satyrs, half man, half goat. In the form familiar to us, this form appeared in Paris in the 19th century. It became popular among high society people, bohemians, famous artists, and musicians. During the American Civil War, it was worn by the military, both by generals and captains, and by ordinary sergeants. With the end of World War II, the Espagnole was adopted by the beatniks, American underground bohemians, who sought freedom of speech and creativity. These guys became close to the Parisian culture of the past centuries, and they needed a beard haircut to match. The 1960s defined the countercultural significance of the Espagnole. It began to be worn by hippies and young people protesting the Vietnam War, and comic book illustrators began to give the beard a negative connotation by painting it on all evil characters. The former attitude towards the Espagnole returned in the 90s. Thanks to popular musicians and actors, it has once again become in demand among representatives of all classes and professions. This trend can be traced back to the present day. A thick Victorian-style beard. During the Victorian era, in the mid-19th century, at the height of the Crimean War, the British Army was experiencing a severe shortage of soap. Therefore, soldiers were not able to shave regularly. After the war ended, they liked the new look. The thick, luxurious beard became a symbol of masculinity, heroism, and aspiration to victory. Although military regulations dictated shaving, sailors were still allowed to grow thick beards. During the first half of the 20th century, the Victorian story was continued by American sailors, who were allowed to disregard the statutory norms. In the 1970s, with the beard boom, bushy beards took over America and Europe. Sometimes it was absurd. Even then, young men were striving to grow the same beard that their fathers had worn. Sideburns, whiskers. The classic sideburns have accompanied the completion of the gentleman's image since the early 18th century. Their shape and degree of thickness changed every 50 years, but surprisingly, they remained popular among men until the early 20th century. After World War I, sideburns were forgotten. Men preferred to shave their faces smooth. Strictness was valued in appearance. Because of the poor economic condition of many states, they had to neglect excessive vegetation and its care. Sideburns returned to subcultures in the 1960s in the heart of England. For the first time, they were noticed by fashion, young working-class people who wanted to follow all the modern trends. Bucky was one of them. The sideburns were followed by the skinheads of the late 1960s, who preferred to compare them to the length of their hair. These types of beards finally took hold in the second wave teddy boy subculture. Dressed with an eye toward Victorian-era fashion, the Teds grew thick and wide sideburns, paying homage to the masculine style of the late 19th century. To this day, this beard haircut holds an important place in the appearance of British subcultures, and the reasons for this are simple: a spectacular look and a minimum of care. That's what sideburns are prized for. Sideburns. Mustaches and sideburns fused into beards have been common among American generals since the 19th century. After the Civil War, they were dubbed sideburns. This name was due to the fact that this uniform was worn by Ambrose Everett Burnside, a general who influenced the outcome of many battles with the rebel army. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, chops continued to be the domain of generals. During the First World War, military men of the highest ranks wore this beard cut. cementing its reputation for heroism and courage. After being sidelined from the 40s through the 60s, the Mutton Chops came back in force in the 1970s. This time, they began to be associated with the image of the hard rocker rebel. Motorhead vocalist Lemmy Kilmister, who kept his chops on until his death, contributed to this.